Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, CEO of WBC. WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 85 organizations focused on elevating women in business and hundreds of business leaders, building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. We live our commitment to DEI, and members of our leadership, our staff, our board of directors, and our WBC champions include more than 34% people of color. And every one of our program areas has DEI goals for 2025 and 2030. So please check the chat to see our 2025 and 2030 targets and join us in accelerating change at wbcollaborative.org. So each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of women's voices for change, and by showcasing leaders committed to allyship, inclusivity, and driving corporate purpose. So today, I'm thrilled to introduce my co-host, Linda Peak Schacht, to discuss today's topic of leadership and reinvention. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Gwen. I am so honored today to bring my friend, Dr. Astrid Sheil, to WBC Faster Together. Astrid was recently appointed the Dean of the School of Management at Simmons University. This is her first week. Simmons, as most of you know, is an all-woman college started in 1902, and it recently, actually back in the 80s, opened its graduate programs to men and women. Before starting this new position, Astrid spent 5 months as a Fulbright scholar at the Bled School of Management in Slovenia. And from 2019 to 2024, she was the Dean of the School of Business at Shenandoah University in Winchester, Virginia. And she's going to tell us some of the amazing things she did while she was there. Before beginning the second career in academia, Astrid worked for 2 Fortune 500 manufacturing companies and 1 multinational company based in Helsinki, Finland. She's from Washington, D.C. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown University and a master's and PhD in organizational communication from the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. Astrid, we've known each other for over a decade, and I've seen you embody the title of this interview, Leadership and Reinvention. So let's start with your own story. Tell us about how you started your transition from corporate to academia and how you've merged those two things in the way that you have not only reinvented yourself, but also helped other people develop as leaders.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you to WBC. I'm delighted to be here. This is really fun. And Linda, as usual, your opening question, wow. We could just talk about that, but I'll try and make it very short and tight. We grew up in an era where you followed the rules, which was you went to high school and then you went to college. And for some people, then you got married and had kids or whatever, or you were looking for your first job. Well, I got into corporate work after college. And while I enjoyed it, there was some things that were very difficult for me. I will tell you that I was not often, instead, I was always the only woman in the board meeting. And at times I used to laugh and say, I feel like Mary Magdalene and the 12, very bad apostles. I mean, it was a difficult time to be in manufacturing because I wasn't an engineer. I was a communicator. And so there I was among 12 engineers. But you know what? I give them a lot of credit. They made it work. They brought me in. I absolutely confused them more times than not on the importance of community, working together, being seen, saying and doing the right things. It was good, but there came a point where I knew I wanted to make a change. I felt like I had gone as far as I could up this ladder. And that's something about reinvention we'll talk about. But that's the main thing. I got to the top of a ladder didn't see a place for me any further up the ladder or a place that I wanted to be on the next ladder up. And that's when I switched, went back to school for 4 years to work on my PhD. I taught and I did consulting during that time. And then I started over at the bottom as an assistant professor, working my way up. And the further up I got into it, the more my managerial skills started showing up in all kinds of committee work. And I just kept sort of getting promoted. And, then I was chair of a department, and then the time came and I went to a leadership program for a year, came back, and then became a dean. So, I mean, it was not a straight line. I didn't start when I was 9 years old and saying, gee, you know what I want to be when I grow up? I want to be dean of a business school. And in some ways, I look back on that trajectory and I think, wow, by keeping an open mind, by accepting all these opportunities, going where the door opened, look where I am, as opposed to saying, this is what I know, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to stay on that track.
Well, I have to ask you, because some of that willingness to reinvent comes from your early life. So since I know a little bit about that, and obviously it led you into the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, tell us just a little bit about that early foundation that gave you the strength, the courage to reinvent.
Well, I know visually I don't look very Puerto Rican, but my mother was Puerto Rican. She had 3 daughters, and she was a feminist. She wouldn't use the word, but boy, she was like, in her fabulous accent, she would say, keep your own name, keep your own money, go to college. When I was 5 years old, my mother took me to Georgetown University, where was not very far from where we lived. And she knelt down in front of me, looked up at the clock tower, and she said, if I have to scrub floors, you will go to this college. And I remember thinking, at 5, okay, this is what's happening. My parents were all about education as the way up and out. And I think that was what made me pretty bold. I went to an all-girl Catholic high school. I had opportunities for leadership in that capacity, but mostly it was my mother and my grandmother. My father was great, but my mother and my grandmother were both, you can be anything you want to be, and I want you to go for it.
Yeah, we stand on the shoulders of those women, don't we? I have watched your trajectory in being the dean of schools of business, schools of management, and you were very successful at Shenandoah in some of the things that you did. Let's shift a little bit and talk about your goals for Simmons, and maybe you can weave in some of what you did at Shenandoah. First, kind of position Simmons for us in the universe of women's education, and how you're going to build on that foundation as you train young women to be leaders in business.
Wow, you really pack these concepts in every question. If I miss a point, please bring me back to it, because that was a lot. Let's start with Simmons. Okay, Simmons started in 1899. A gentleman by the name of Simmons left money. He had 2, I think maybe 3 daughters. And he knew it was really important for women to be educated. So right from the get-go, there was this focus on women as equals, as learners, as doers, as shapers. And I think that was always the MO of Simmons, was that these were women of substance who were going to be in business. They were going to be working at hospitals, whatever the area, they were going to be out working in the world. And so when you have that kind of foundation, it's really very powerful. I would say that about 10 years ago, if you read Clayton Christensen and you talk about disruption and the fact that right now many small schools are closing across the United States. The business plan hasn't changed in 100 years for most universities, private schools, but now it is changing. And that's where Simmons comes in. Simmons ran into some difficulties, I think about 10 years ago. They tried some things. They've got it all figured out. Not all, but I mean, they're going in the right direction. And the reason they wanted me to come on board is because of that concept of let's go forward. It's great what happened in the past, but that's not the world our students are going to be entering into. Let me offer you this. If you think about it, just in a business concept, at the turn of the last century, so we're going back to 1900, the Fortune 500, I think 440 are completely gone. But during that period of 100 years and more, basically a company had about 75 years to have a life, to keep the life in the system, right? It took a long time for people to want washing machines and refrigerators and cars. It took a long time to bring those on. But all of that has shrunk over the years because of technology. First, it was 45 years, then 15 years is a complete turnaround. Now we're looking at every 7 years, right? That's the length and the time a company has, right? So they have to start reinventing themselves about 3.5 years into the process. Think about this. If you got your MBA in 1985, you could ride that MBA all the way to the end of your career. You never had to go back to school. The information was stable. It stayed the same. You could retire because, now we're starting to change. But now, if you graduate with an MBA now, you will be back in school in 3 to 4 years upskilling because the technology is changing so fast. The demands, everything has sped up. I loved what the CEO just said, accelerate the process of change. Well, we're in it. And at Simmons, that's the whole goal now, is to ride that wave, not to drown in it, but to ride it, which means that we want students to be ready for the world of work they're going to meet.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about. That first goal that I've heard you talk about for Simmons is an undergraduate program that is practical, achievable, and scalable so that students are work ready for a rapidly evolving business world. Talk about practical and achievable and scalable, particularly practical, because that's what you bring to academia, right? You bring your experience in business to academia. So what does that look like? What does an undergraduate program, either what you did at Shenandoah or what you're doing at Simmons, what is it that makes that practical and achievable? And here's why it's so important. WBC has one of its goals, creating a pipeline of women leaders. And you're at the very beginning of that pipeline. So help us understand what you're bringing to that.
Let me go back to Shenandoah because I'm only in day 4 at Simmons. I don't have a lot of examples yet. I will, though. Invite me back in a year from now.
We will.
But at Shenandoah, I made sure that I taught at least one class a year. And when we were coming out of COVID in 2021, spring of 2021, I had a group of seniors that I was to be teaching organizational communication and presentation skills and all of that, a group of seniors that had been online for 18 months. And I thought, this is going to go nowhere. They're not going to learn anything. I need to bring them all back to do something in the community beyond themselves, to see how business can be a force for good, and to take all of those things, that accounting class, that finance class, that marketing class, all of those siloed classes, and show how they come together to make something better in the community. And what I came up with was a golf tournament. Now, the first day of class, I literally walked in and said, we're going to do something different. You're going to hate this class until the day it happens, and then you're going to love this class. because you are going to do everything. You're going to learn everything. You're going to struggle. You're going to figure out. There's no test. There's no exam at the end. We're going to do something, pay it forward. And I don't know how to do it, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to throw a golf tournament. We're going to sell it out, and we're going to raise $20,000 for scholarships. And I said, and I don't know how to do it. I'll see you Thursday. And I walked out. But you know what? We came back on Thursday, and students had already been thinking, well, why don't we call the chamber and see how they do a silent auction? Why don't we do this? And they struggled, and they did all of the work with the Winchester Country Club. They negotiated, they did this, they did that. And at the end, you know what? We sold out, and we raised $20,000 our first year.
And 5 years later, how much have you raised through that program?
4 years later, $250,000 for scholarship for first-gen, high-performing local students. And it really has become a signature event for Shenandoah University. The community comes out. They love it. The students love it. And guess what? They get jobs from this. They get internships. I have bank presidents coming up to me in the past year saying, you know, your students are really great. I'd like to hire that young woman to come and work in our bank. You know, this is how you do it. It's still making contact. And so that's the type of practical experience that I think creates this sense of confidence. You may not know how to do it, but you will get there. You have the confidence because you've done something outside of a classroom.
Yeah, which is so important. And those of us who have taken a second or third career in academia know how important that practice part, not just theory, but practice. Now let's talk about some things that you and I have worked on together that focus on women's leadership. You have come to Nashville and worked with Music City Girls Lead. You've worked with the Executive Leadership Academy of the women's group Cable. Let's talk about women and leadership and reinvention. What challenges do you think you're going to face with the young women at Simmons? What have you seen in training women, in getting them to have the confidence to move forward in developing as leaders?
Well, I think it is a question of confidence. And I go back to Shenandoah just for this one story. But in my very first class, you know, I had a very strong group of sports management students, all male. And I only had 3 or 4 women in this original class. And at the end of the first class, this tiny woman, an immigrant, her family was from Vietnam. She came up and she said, Dr. Sheil, you have to let me drop the course. And I remember saying, Grace, why? And she said, because I'm not a leader. It was a complete mindset. And I looked at her and I got into mom mode and I said, I forbid you to drop this class. And I was just like, no, Grace, you have to stay with this. And you know what? As the semester went by, at the end, we took a vote on who was the leader of the class. And guess who it was? It was Grace, all 5'2" of her. You know, it's that sense of you don't know what you don't know. You're stronger than you think you are. You can do hard things. You can make things happen, but you have to believe in yourself. And if I teach anything to women, what I am teaching is confidence.
Yeah, and we all know that women don't always ask for the promotion, for the raise, and that confidence just can help people recognize their worth, right? And not just become leaders, in this case, in the class, but
Right.
become leaders who know how to advocate for themselves. And you've talked about the communication needed to advocate for yourself.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I will tell you that when I worked in the corporate world, at one point I was head of HR for this multinational company, and my role was to hire engineers. And I can tell you, in the time that I worked there for a couple of years, every single man that applied never accepted the first offer. Never. I just got used to it. They never said, they always came back, with, I want $25,000 more, or I want this, I want that. And I recognized that when I got into academia and I made my first offer to a female academic, and she said, okay. And I actually stopped her and I said, no, honey, don't do that. Don't do that. Talk to me. What do you really need? What do you want? I literally went against my own university and said, no, come back and give me something to negotiate for you. Right? It's not in our nature to ask for more, but we need to ask for more.
That's great. Well, that kind of feeds into my last question to you, and that is, what challenge would you like to leave with us today? What is your call to action to the people who are listening or who will watch this later?
Well, I have 3 things, and I'll make it very quick. First, make reinventing yourself so you don't know something. I have never, ever interviewed a man that ever thought he couldn't do the job, whether he had the qualifications or not. So don't wait until you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. Go for it. That's the first thing. The second thing, recognize when it's time to leave an organization. If you keep butting up against it, if people around you are moving, but you're not, and they say, oh, we can't live without you in this job, but on Sunday afternoons, if you get that Sunday sadness where, oh my goodness, I have to go to work tomorrow, that's the kiss of death, because you won't bring your A game the next day. And the third thing that I want women to understand is fit is critical to success. When I worked for the company in Helsinki, I made more money than I ever thought I would, but it wasn't the right environment for me. And after a couple of years with an ulcer and a couple of kids in tow, I thought, I can't keep doing this. I'm so unhappy. So it's never about the money. Find the fit, and you will exceed beyond your wildest dreams. So those are my.
That's great. 3 great things. And Dr. Astrid Sheil, thank you so much for joining us today. And we will have you back 1 year in when you can tell us what you've done in your inaugural year at Simmons. And we thank all of you for being with us today. We invite you to wbcollaborative.org to learn more about WBC's initiatives to increase women in the C-suite and the boardroom, to address underrepresentation of women in STEM and the available capital for women, and to advance a pipeline of women leaders to bring gender and pay equity and diversity and inclusion to the business landscape. Join us weekly to keep up to date on our next guest, on our progress, on the movement for gender equity in business, and follow the latest issues with us on social media at WB Collaborative on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we will see you next week.
Thank you, Linda.